about that. I had to verify something for the division report.
Good.
I have verified it.
Good morning. We'll convene the meeting of the New York State Cemetery Board. I'm Mark Patterson. I'm the chair of the board for Rosanna Rosado, Secretary of State.
Jill Faber, designee for Letitia James, Attorney General.
Thomas Fuller, New York State Department of Health, representing Howard Zucker.
Great.
Louis Polishuk, Division Director.
Alicia Young, Division of Cemeteries.
Mike Seelman, Senior Investigator.
Brendan Stanton, Investigating Division of Cemeteries.
David Jacobson, Division of Cemeteries.
Tony Melillo, Counsel to the Board and Division.
Great. So thank you all for being here. I think we've got a pretty straightforward agenda. You want to look at the minutes of the past meeting? I don't know if I saw them amended, Louis.
I don't remember if I sent them to you amended.
You send everybody else amended?
The fact that you're saying that makes me think that I did not send them to you. You did post them.
I did
You
put
posted
them in the Dropbox.
Okay.
They're rather lengthier than usual because I really wanted to capture council's comments and public comments and your comments on the Shenango Valley Forest Lawn Group merger.
Okay.
Other than that, there are usual terse summary of proceedings.
Do I have any corrections or additions, deletions to the minutes?
The date was correct.
That's correct.
The date is correct.
Yep.
That was the other thing I corrected.
Okay. I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll move.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Minutes are accepted. A report from our council, land legislation and regulation. Any legislation? There's a report.
There's been some activity, mostly one house, one chamber.
What is the sound of one house legislating?
Very quiet.
Never know.
If you go through your list, let's see. Item number 5, this is Assembly Bill 1605. It's been amended, same with its companion in the Senate, 1876. This is a bill that was passed by both chambers and then vetoed. It looks like the amendments are intended to address some of the concerns that led to the veto. And it's on first calendar report in the Senate, so it may be moving toward a vote there. Number 14 in the list, this is the bill that was only in the Senate and now has an Assembly companion. This would give the mother greater control over fetal remains, permit the mother to obtain removal change of area permit from a local registrar directly. Let's see. Number 19 on the bill. Looks like it also has now an Assembly companion to the Senate bill. This is the bill that would allow the two cemeteries in Suffolk County to merge, where their total acreage would not exceed 325 acres. And that's also in the Senate. It's on the first
Can I ask
calendar
a
report.
question about that merger?
Sure.
Is the language of it, would it permit them to merge, or does it affect the merger?
It permits them.
It permits them to do it, okay. So they still have to
Yep.
petition, okay.
Right.
But they were previously precluded.
Right. I just didn't know whether it was sort of by proclamation they are now merged, or they need to go through the process of
It
merging.
actually doesn't even name them for ease of passage reasons. So it identifies two cemeteries located in Suffolk County with contiguous or adjacent land.
Okay.
So
Because it came sort of across my desk, and it actually, I thought that they were named.
no.
No? Okay.
I'm
'Cause in the
correct
email
on
to
that.
me,
It's not.
They're not.
they're
I think
named.
they might be named maybe in a memo.
Okay.
But they're not named in the actual
Got it.
bill. And from our past experience with Department of State, they like to have the final say, merger documents, or
Yeah.
so
Right.
it's a permissive thing, which is what.
Permitting.
So then they would apply.
Got it. That was the only clarification.
I don't know if this is actually possible, but if there were two other cemeteries of appropriate size and with a shared border.
In Suffolk County.
Yeah, in Suffolk County. There might be one. No, there might be one or two others. Could they potentially merge as well? Because I know when Locust Valley got its special legislation, it actually, I think, allows any cemetery in Nassau County to acquire a certain amount of adjoining land.
Well, keep in mind, if they have less than
They could
250
do it
acres
anyway.
combined, they could do it anyway.
Well, so then it probably doesn't affect anyone
Right.
else.
All right. Continuing, we have number 20 is new. It was filed on March 19, just after our last meeting. Amends the public health law, relates to disposition of cremated remains in possession of funeral home that have been unclaimed for 120 days. Currently, Public Health Law 4202 specifically allows them, the remains to be buried in a cemetery or put in a niche. This adds scattering in a cemetery scattering grounds. Just an
That's
oversight.
a little risky if you're if you're gonna. I mean, every now and then we get a call like this where somebody wants cremated remains from 20 years ago, and where you're putting them in the ground or in a niche, you can still return them.
Well, you can now point them to where they are.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, the good news is it protects the crematory / funeral director / whoever's doing this.
Right. I mean, they're allowed to scatter at sea, not on cemetery
Right.
grounds. So why not let them
Fair
scatter
enough.
in a cemetery as well?
But anytime we do a presentation for continuing education for funeral directors, this issue comes up.
Oh, yeah. This bill, doesn't this also say that the funeral home can turn the cremated remains over to the cemetery, and they've got an additional 120 days they can try to contact family?
I think you're right. Yes.
Try to, I talked with Randy McCullough at the State Association regarding this bill briefly. In fact, he's want to send me the copy of it. And just trying to get a sense of why this came up. But, is there a angle for the cemeteries to create a source of revenue by taking over these cremains and maybe reaching out to the family that the funeral home was given up on? Or?
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Well, that's-
the second part.
Right, that's an
Charging
excellent
a fee
question.
for-
Do they have to take them?
They don't. It's
Yeah, it
permissive.
doesn't say that they have to. It says they may.
And who's going to pay that fee?
That's what I'm.
Well,
that's what we were curious
presumably
about.
they wouldn't take them without
The
all
family.
that worked out.
Right.
It just says the funeral director may, with written consent from the regulated cemetery, dispose of the unclaimed cremains by providing them to the cemetery. And then the cemetery has an additional 120 days to locate family and make a decision on whether to scatter them or store them. But then
I
it
suppose
becomes
it could be that the cemetery has a closer connection to the family if it has a family plot.
There probably are cases where that's true.
So. All
Do
right,
you know why that would have done?
Yes. Since I wrote it, I get
go for it.
You're always quiet back there.
That's
that.
right.
I was shaking my head. I'm just not going to interrupt the board without an invitation. But yes, it specifically came across from Western New York cemeteries who were interested in the fact that there were still funeral homes who were not disposing of the remains.
most don't.
Most don't, right? Or they, some have arrangements with cemeteries which you're probably aware of, where they'll put them in a vault in the cemetery. They'll use, level Z that no one's going to purchase, and they'll put the cremated remains in there. And it's permissive. You don't have to do it. The funeral home doesn't have to do it. To Lewis's statement, the cemeteries are already, and the funeral homes are already provided liability protection in the remains after 120 days. This not only gives them protection on the 120 days.
Cemetery
No.
board, yep.
Come invited?
It's a public meeting. Come on in.
It extends that liability protection for the extra 120 days only if the cemetery chooses and a funeral home together decide that they're going to do this arrangement. And the idea being that the cemetery may have a better opportunity reaching out to the families that they serve by getting them placed in the cemetery. Yes, it doesn't involve revenue if they can
Yeah.
do that. If not, the cemetery can choose to stick them in the vault.
But it's at the
They'll-
family's choice.
It's
so
at the
that's-
family's
yeah.
choice. And as far as being able to recover the remains, many cemeteries put them in a place that they can recover them, but the statute already permits funeral homes and cemeteries to dispose of the remains in other permanent ways, such as scattering in a waterway that's permissible. So they can be taken care of in ways that they're.
I certainly think the funeral homes would support this. I mean, right now, whenever we close a firm or a firm is merging, they have to give us a list of unclaimed cremains, and some of these firms have dozens and dozens of sets of cremains. And the reason they don't dispose of them is they're afraid of the liability should somebody come back 30 years later, the expense if they have to buy a niche or a vault someplace.
And ICCFA, I think just this month had an article in their magazine, I'll send it to you, about this issue, about how there is just even with statutes that permit time frames to dispose of remains, they're not being taken care of. And, from the cemetery's perspective, we're in the memorialization business. That's what we do. And people shouldn't be stuck in closets or in storage rooms. And if we can facilitate the memorialization of these people, that's what we want to do.
And people in closets sometimes result in seven-figure lawsuits, as we
Yes.
learned at some of these conferences.
But not to be cynical.
I'm not being cynical. It's not.
But there is, there is liability protection that was already afforded the funeral homes and the cemeteries in the previous statute. This would extend that to the extra 120 days.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming.
Thank you. Always my pleasure.
Great. One more new bill. This is number 21 on the list. Amends the anti-combination law to permit a funeral entity that was grandfathered under the law to permit it to continue to operate a crematory, to transfer the right to operate the crematory, to add space, to meet increased demand, and to relocate. This obviously is a reaction to the board's decisions and posted memo that says, a funeral entity that's been grandfathered and operating a crematory can't do these three things. So it would upend this board's prior determinations. And that's a one-house bill right now. It's just in the Senate 5057. And that's it.
So, sound of one house.
Any other questions for Tony? Tony, any other rules and regulations to add?
Nope. We have a list that we need to get to, Division and I.
All right.
Yes.
Lewis, division report?
So we're coming to the end of annual report filing season. We've received 984 to date, which is pretty much on track with what we normally get. Bear in mind that some cemeteries, although our deadline for calendar year filers is March 31st, some cemeteries get extensions, and some cemeteries are on a fiscal year, so we're totally on target with what we normally get. Of those, we have received 274 of them, approximately, online, which means that we are now above 25%
Great.
in terms of online versus paper submissions, which we are extraordinarily pleased with. I think, if it was the December or January meeting, I promised to provide statistical reports on certain delegated functions in terms of what we have done with those. I'm going to preface this all by saying that our new database is exceeding our capacity for now to A, keep up with actually using it, and B, run reports from it. So we've culled this data via other means, and it should be taken with a certain amount of grains of salt. I may very well be revisiting these figures later, but these are pretty accurate, and I said I'd do it, so I'm going to give you what the numbers that we've been able to generate. The functions, so one of the functions that we have been performing for years is review of annual reports. Of the 984 we received this year, we have so far reviewed 373. We probably reviewed more than that, but that's what we've put in the database. That's a 38%. That means we've gotten through 38% of them so far, which is pretty good considering that they all come in as a big clump in March and early April. In terms of audits in the first quarter, we performed 48 audits, 36 of which were completed. It's not. I guess audit's not really a delegated function, but it's related to annual report filing and review. Lot reclamations we've logged in 18 this year. I have to, again, this is one of the places where I have to put a caveat. Not all the investigators are putting everything in the database yet, and we haven't backfilled stuff that may have been sitting around. So we've received 18. None of those have yet been approved. On net appreciation, we have net appreciation applications. We have 2 of them in the system, neither of which are, one of which we had additional questions for the board, the other of which we have legal questions for council. We are finishing our write-up on that. Rules and regulations, we've gotten 3 changes this year. We've approved 1 of them so far. Probably get to the other 2 soon. Society reclamations, we have exactly 1 in the system. It was not complete as submitted, and I've asked them for more information. Rate applications, we've had 62 rate applications this year. We have approved 47, of which all but 3 have been standard rate applications, 3 have been ECI. And I think that is all but one of the delegated functions that I promised to report on. The remaining one is our subsequent review of the use of cemetery funds on vandalism, et cetera, applications. Because we approved so many towards the end of the year, in the second half of last year, and because we ran out of money, to put those 2 things together, we've actually been out to only 1 cemetery in the past quarter to confirm that work has been finished, as Jordanville Cemetery in Herkimer County. That's mostly because of all the other ones that finished, we went back and signed off on them in terms of the work being properly done in the previous quarter. So I haven't included that.
Okay. Now, what's your intention? Sort of present these things in a more formal way in the future?
Yes.
In writing for the
Exactly. In advance, in writing, based on the database, nicely formatted and all of that. This we had to back into at the last minute because the database didn't work.
Okay. So I think
the
that,
reports from the database didn't work.
again, it's sort of an open, I would like to consider this an open discussion, right? So one of the things that's in play is delegated duties, which ones are right or not, are still under review, but the monitoring, the board's requirement to sort of monitor those things is something we want to say, this is the right way to do it, this is sufficient, this is the right information we're getting. I don't think we can determine that from the oral report. That's interesting, but we need to see it in sort of a more official report to start to really keep looking at that.
Again, it's a little different. I'll give you. We can get a written report for the next quarter, and if there's changes to these numbers, I can get you an updated report on that. Having said that, certain things like rate applications, other than walking you through an actual rate application, it's difficult to give you any more information than we did.
That's the discussion great. We should keep having that discussion.
And then maybe to the extent, you prefaced, you said these are just standard rate applications instead of the ECI. Maybe when you're reporting, you can identify things that are, not standard and fairly formulaic, and that we would want to have a larger discussion on.
Well, I'm going to go ahead. I mean, ECI.
I didn't. No. I don't mean that. I'm just saying you made a distinction, right? I'm not talking about that category of delegated duties. I just mean generally.
Wherever there's
something that you feel that this is not standard and formulaic, and we want to have a discussion about this decision we made or this.
The vast
this exception.
majority of non-ECI applications we get are not because cemeteries are doing something unusual in terms of asking for their rate applications, is that the smaller cemeteries don't raise their rates every year. And every 5 years or so, they look at their expenses, see what their expenses have gone, and ask us for a number. That number doesn't necessarily coincide with the ECI.
Right.
So it's
But again,
not.
I think it's more to the point where
it's a
you
broader,
said there was one reclamation that you would like to get board guidance on. So
Yes.
there are
That
certain
type
things
of-
Right.
that we have delegated
Well,
to you.
council and then possibly the board.
Right. So that's the kind of stuff that surfaces up, right? So that it's not just a report,
It's-
but here's something that we think we need clarification.
Extremely rare that, in our view at least, that's going to happen either with a rate application or rules and regulations.
Right, yeah, no, it's fine. There's particularly where something pops up. You've said that a couple times, the things that you want to.
Just to clarify, the use of the ECI is actually more of a ministerial review. They just have to plug in the right numbers. So when they're not using the ECI, they're basically informing a division that their costs have gone up this much, and therefore their rates are going to go up this much. And so
And that's
division
still-
has more discretionary role in what Lewis has termed the standard.
Got it.
This is good. I mean, I'm pleased with that. Just that under the overall, we've gone through a process of identifying board powers and duties, identifying which of those have been delegated to the division or to the director for their work, and now we're also looking at the way in which the board maintains its oversight of those things through statistical reporting and other conversations. So this is progress towards
Great.
that, cementing the board's responsibilities in terms of its powers and duties. So,
Once we get the database working, we presumably can get the names of the cemeteries in question added to reports. It's going to get a little thick, but we can probably do it.
well, the board should decide what they want to see and what they don't.
Well,
want
that's what I was
see.
about to ask you. Do you want that?
I don't know. Let's see what we can do and give us an example, and we'll continue to have that
May-
conversation over the next period of time.
Maybe the first time once the database gives you the ability to do the reports, you provide us the first time with more information than you think we would need, and then we can cull it down based on what we think is helpful. Does that make sense?
Because, I mean, some of this, it's subject to I'm not the guy developing the database. It should be easy to get the database to generate which cemeteries have come in for which things.
Sure.
That should be doable.
Okay.
If you want to look at particular rate increases, there's no way the database
I don't
is
think
going
you
to
should.
handle that.
Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Just we'll see what we've got. We're trying to establish the right level of oversight and monitoring of those duties. So, don't do something you can't do. Do what you can do, and
Yeah.
we'll talk about it. So great. Thank you for that. And then you have more. You have
On that, no.
on that. No. Next, Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, so Frederick Douglass Memorial Park has been in receivership since 2005. On Saturday, they held a lot owners meeting, and they have elected a board for the first time since anyone can remember, because before then their board was one person for a while. So they are transitioning, as we speak, from being in receivership. The receivership ends somewhere between mid-May and mid-June. There seems to be disagreement between the AG and the receiver on what the actual date is. They'll straighten that out. But they now have a board in place who's going to be working with the receiver to ensure the orderly transition of things to them running themselves. And this is obviously a very good thing, and we
Yeah.
congratulate them on that. And this is the way cemeteries are supposed to be run.
Great. And so that's progress. And the strategy that we were able to help support of getting that receiver appointed, a new receiver appointed, a second receiver, to get to a point where the board people felt comfortable taking on those responsibilities.
Obviously, we're going to be meeting with the board and trying to provide technical assistance because the cemetery still faces some very significant challenges,
Great.
like lack of money and lack of graves. But this is still
Yeah.
obviously a positive step.
Great. That's good news. Anything else from the division report?
That's all I got. Oh, well, NISAC's policy conference is next month, but we'll mention that when we say when our next meeting is.
Next meeting. Good reminder.
Oh, yes, there is. We're still in the process of figuring out coverage, but the division expects to be represented at both of NISAC's regional meetings next week in Buffalo and Syracuse, respectively.
Okay. Are you presenting, or are you just attending, or what?
Showing up and answering questions, somewhere in between.
Okay.
I mean, generally, with these gatherings, they're a little advanced for a Cemetery 101 presentation, but they always come with questions. So,
So there's a session.
yeah,
There's
so
a Q&A session.
right. So generally, we have a very, very short. Somebody from the division gives a very short presentation, much like the update I did now, with that level of detail of information about a couple of topics. Literally no more than 5 minutes, and then opens the floor for questions. And there are always questions. And frankly, our main role there is to A, take questions publicly, and B, take questions at sidebar to see what's on people's minds in the industry.
Okay. Okay.
So you actually have 2 vandalism reports. Wanted to give you a year-end report on what we did last year and a report on what we have this year. So for last year, we collected 451 grand and change in vandalism fees. Our appropriation was 939,000, which means, do the math, that was the extent to which the general fund have subsidized the fund, or funded the fund. We granted just over 1.5 million in applications, and we had just under 1.1 million still pending. That is where we ended the year last year. We are now moving on to this year. We now officially have an appropriation of $2 million. So far, we've collected 75,000 in vandalism fees, and you guys have not yet granted any applications, but we still have that same just under $1.1 million in applications pending. We haven't gotten any new applications in this fiscal year because there's only 12.
None in this fiscal
9
year.
days
We
old.
have applications that were granted in excess of the appropriation.
Correct. So that would be 1.5 minus 939. I take a calculator. I can give you an exact number.
So that comes out of the $2 million approach, right?
Correct.
Okay. So
That's $604,515.
remaining.
No, it's
Oh.
that's what we've already committed.
Okay.
So you have 1.4 million left for this year.
Okay.
And none have come in this quarter?
Nothing has come in yet.
And is that you have that in a report that Commissioner? Is that
Everything is in the report except for the 1.4 million that's free and clear.
Nice.
And because I just wrote all over my copies, I'll get you a copy on your way out.
Thank you.
You can have a copy of the last year end of year report, but this one I just wrote on, so I can't give you that. I guess I can.
I don't care.
I'll give you that one.
Right. So, any questions from the board members on that report? I mean, again, all things being relative, that's pretty good news in the sense that we've more than doubled the appropriation from last year. I think we still anticipate that that demand will exceed our reach, but we still have a ways to go on that. So
We attempt to both manage cash flow and, more importantly, ensure proper completion of the work by withholding the bulk of a payment until after completion. Having said that, we're not going to recommend that you commit more money than we actually have. In other words, at some point we're not going to play the float to.
yes,
Right. If we're coming in over 1.4, spending over 1.4 million,
As
it's going to
before.
be with the explicit proviso that that's pending availability of funds, and we ain't got none this year.
So we're not going to push it out then?
Well, I don't want to try
Like
to. I
we've
don't
been
want to. Well, we will and we won't. I don't want to. I think I slightly misspoke. My point is simply that when we're not going to treat. So we've been paying 25% up front and 75% later. But that 1.4 million, we're going to consider that gone when we've encumbered when we've approved applications totaling that, even though we're only paying 25% up front.
Okay.
That doesn't mean we won't necessarily present. This is a longer conversation we're going to have. That doesn't mean we won't necessarily present to you more applications, with the caveat that we don't have the money to pay them yet.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is I don't want to say, oh, pay a quarter. Well, you can actually multiply that by 4 because we're only paying a quarter up front. Because the second bill usually comes due in the same fiscal year.
Right.
Not always, but usually.
Just so I'm clear, and the board is clear, with the applications pending of almost 1.1 million, assuming those could all get approved,
We'll have 300 more.
we'll have 300 what?
$300,000 more left
Available
for other
for the rest
applications
of
that
the
come
year.
in. Correct.
Right. Okay. That was what I wanted the board to understand.
So we're not quite done yet, but we're very close.
but it does. We had a discussion at the division level that this does raise the question about whether or not we, as a board, should consider other ways of looking at the funds. We review them in the past because of the fees And particularly in times when there was sweeps, that these were sort of as of right, but there are discretionary, like all other grant programs, you can sort of get presented with applications, say yes or no. So we don't have any good thought about that, but we do think we should think about it,
Like developing criteria.
developing criteria. And then having a conversation whether that's a good idea or not, right? Not even if we want to go that far, but the division will start to reach out to people, talk to people, and just see if there's ways of thinking that we should do that, because these are now mostly general fund appropriations and subject, like any other grant program, to criteria, to some competition in that sense, or are potentially. So that's just something I wanted to raise. Nothing changes till it changes, right? It's all board. All applicants should continue to put in applications the way they always would, with the expectation that if they meet the eligible criteria, they get funded.
So just to make one thing clear, we have 123,000 and change in applications for you this month. That's included in the 1.1 million. So you still have that $300,000 of uncommitted money still out there.
Yeah,
And it's not going to affect that.
Right.
That's just reducing the 1.1 million that's hanging
Right.
over us from last year.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about the Valence report?
Can you send me a copy of that?
Of course.
Thank you.
We'll send it to everybody, right?
Okay.
Send it to the
Not only that, but we'll make sure that it's part of the packet. Well, I think what happened is I asked relatively late in the game to do two reports. One is a year-end report,
Right.
one is a going forward report, and that's why we didn't get it out. Starting with next month, you're only going to get the New Year's report.
Right.
So you'll get that as
But
part
you'll
of the regular
circulate
packet.
that year-end report to the board, right?
Yep,
Right, reflect that in the minutes.
both of them.
Right. Okay. So then we're proceeding to the applications. We have 7 applications.
Five.
Oh,
There were 2 in the original draft agenda that didn't make the cut. The new agenda was in the link that we circulated. Yeah,
yeah, my fault.
sorry. I should have pointed out to you when we update these things.
Yeah. So we have 5 applications.
Yeah, there were 2 that ended up not being ready. One of them was an abandonment application, which did not have the required accounting of funds, and the other was dangerous monuments, Mike, and we were missing something on that, and I don't remember what it was.
Yes.
I know you did. We're missing something.
Okay. And they're all dangerous monument
They are
applications.
all dangerous monument applications.
So would you like to go through them? West Bainbridge Rural Cemetery?
All right, oh, they're at the end. Oh, they sneaky.
So it's an application for $20,000, $20,732.56. For dangerous monuments, anything met all the criteria?
Yep, pretty straightforward, 25 hazardous monuments, they were all hazardous. Standard foundations. The low bid offers a 20-year warranty. Pretty standard. Recommend approval.
Any questions about West Bainbridge Rural Cemetery? I'm going to take them all in a clump. Glendale Cemetery for $21,352.37. Dangerous monuments. Anything?
Same thing, 25 monuments, they're hazardous. Recommend approval, $21,352.
Okay. Any questions? Townsend Cemetery, $11,635.85. Dangerous monuments.
That was 16 monuments. There were 3 that really didn't fit the criteria of hazard. They were might have been tipping slightly, but I couldn't move them. And I
discussed it with the cemetery, and if you feel that I'm wrong in saying that these don't appear hazardous at this time, let me know, and we can discuss it. They agreed that they didn't appear hazardous at this time. And we amended the estimates.
Great. Any questions of Townsend? Bayside Cemetery, dangerous monuments, $6,302 in St. Lawrence County.
They had requested, they said they had 11 monuments. One was not actually a monument, it was a huge piece of, it was granite or marble, it was lot curbing that had kind of moved out of place. And it had already fallen, so it didn't fall on anybody, it wasn't in the way, it wasn't impeding anything, so I had the same discussion and they agreed. And we amended the estimates.
Any questions for Bayside? Savannah Butler Cemetery in Wayne County for $63,366.76. Dangerous monuments.
That was a big one, and there were several that, like I said, were maybe slightly tipping, but I couldn't move them. And one of the big things was it was kind of interesting. So we allow, if they're going to remove and dispose of a monument, we would allow them to put a flush marker in. And they had a rather large older monument that was made of concrete. I'd never seen one like that, and it had.
It's unusual.
Yeah, it was really unusual. It was very ornate, but it was just disintegrating. And they wanted to replace it with a upright granite marker. So I had them amend that to a flush marker, which saved, I think, $600. And then there were several monuments, like I said, that we had that discussion. They didn't appear hazardous at that time, and they agreed. So that came down from 82,000 to 63,366.
I think the public discussion about the review we do and the checking to see if things are dangerous or not, especially in the context of having limited resources, is important. And so we're husbanding the states with this by our reviews, both fiscal, both investigation and audit, accounting. Okay, so no other questions. I'll make a motion to approve the 5 applications for dangerous monuments as listed in the fund application report, totaling $123,389.49. Have a second?
Second.
Great. All in favor? Aye.
I have
Motion
orders
carries.
for your signature.
We have orders for our signature as we speak, as we write. Okay.
In real time.
Can we all move on to Woodland Cemetery?
Woodland. Woodland is what we are hoping will be our next success story on Staten Island. Woodland has been, let's just say, minimally maintained for something in the order of 30 years. It's quite overgrown. They have one active section right in front that is not overgrown, but they have, understandably, difficulty selling in that section because the rest of the cemetery is overgrown and badly in need of maintenance. A couple of years ago, I want to say it was in 2015, I think the sale closed in February of 2016, they sold a chunk of land at the front of the cemetery with the board's approval and court approval to a developer. They built a couple of houses on the land, and they're close to done with that. The result of this is that the cemetery has about $550,000 in its permanent maintenance fund. There is a newly activated, however you want to say it, there's a group of people now who is taking, board members who are taking the lead and trying to manage the cemetery actively. There was some question as to whether the cemetery would even continue as an active cemetery, some discussion as to whether they could be abandoned to someone else. Upshot of that has been that there's a board that wants things to continue and wants to keep the place going, and they feel that to be able to effectively sell graves in their newer section, and they have another section at the back that they can develop once the newer section is full, they need to start showing tangible progress from the houses. There are all sorts of rumors verging on conspiracy theories as to money, what happened to the money that they received for those houses and what the cemetery is up to, and all sorts of stuff is flying around the neighborhood. To answer that, partly to answer that and partly just to improve the ability of the cemetery to sell, they feel they need to use some of that money to start making the place look good. They've got a series of steps they want to take. Mostly it's adding millings and leveling out roads that have become unlevel, and clearing dead, diseased trees, overgrowth, underbrush, mess, essentially, and otherwise making the place look much more like a functioning cemetery and less like its name, a woodland. And they're proposing to borrow $150,000 from the PM with a $10,000 a year payback, $50,000 balloon payment at the end of that. They think they can easily make the money in sales in their front section. 2 nearby cemeteries, one regulated, one not, are very low on graves, so they think they can sell graves there. And so what they're looking for now is approval, recommendation of approval of a permanent maintenance loan. I do not think this is a major renovation. I've been out there, but I wrote up the major renovation factors, so to the extent anybody thinks this ought to be a major renovation, I'd ask that you approve that as well. But I don't think adding millings to the roads or whatever else they're planning on doing counts. But that's what I got.
What would be the difference of that?
Nothing other than that would be a separate application the board would need to approve. So I wanted to make sure that you had everything to approve should you decide that needed to be done.
Okay. We've looked at the plan. We would think the plan is fiscally sound.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's only one little wrinkle to it, which is they had essentially of the 150 they want to borrow, about 35 goes to a contingency for other things they may want to do along the way, that other expenses that come up, et cetera, et cetera. They don't want to have to go to court twice. We agree with that, but we would like to we would like your recommendation to specifically state that they don't touch that money. They can't touch that money without coming to us first and clearing it with us.
What's that mean? What's
It means they would report to us and say
the division, to the board,
to the division. They would come to us and say, "Hey, the road project is overrunning by 20 grand, and we're going to need the rest of the money for other stuff. Here's the backup to it. This okay with you guys?" And we'll go out there and look at it and say, "Sure, this okay with you us."
So just to clarify a little bit, the proposals that the cemetery has put in front of the division and the board equal about 110,000, 115.
It's 115.
Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the 35,000 is a cushion in case there are overruns or they decide to do additional work. And since they haven't presented how they would spend that money yet, division wants to be, which I think is entirely appropriate, able to see what they're going to spend that additional money on if they spend it before they do. I did have some other questions. I don't know if you've done your presentation.
That's all I have.
Okay. I think it would help if, because they're going to start spending this as the project goes along, but they're going to be making an application to court to borrow the fund and the funds and repay it. There should be a start and end date for when they start repayment and when they complete repayment.
But yeah, the court papers should specify that. Agreed.
Yeah, and are there going to be any conditions? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Don't know if there was an interest factor or they're just repaying principal.
Straight principal.
And it's over 10 years.
Correct.
Okay.
Our recommendation is still, they did not include a draft petition with the papers, so our recommendation is subject to your review of the draft petition.
Right. The board's approval should be on that condition as well.
I should have said so. It says so in my memo. I just forgot to say it.
But there are no conditions that could be invoked whereby, where some economic situation, financial situation that they don't have to pay or they pay more. It's this is a commitment for the annual payments of $10,000 regardless of what's going on.
They seem confident enough that with a little cleaning up and a little marketing, they can sell graves in the new section. I did ask them that.
And this is a cemetery with zero record, zero financial history of making money that would even pay the 10,000, right?
Well,
So-
they have had some grave sales. It's been fairly minimal, but it's been a fairly inactive cemetery. Both their income and expenses have been close to non-existent for years.
Right.
They're expecting to sell 20 graves a year.
Well, they have neighbors who are selling more than that, who are running out of space.
Right.
There are some financial numbers I wanted to get some clarification on. As I mentioned, you provide numbers for 14 years, 2014, 15, 16, and 17. The only real substantial income appears to be dividend and interest.
Correct.
Minimal expenses. But looking down at the permanent maintenance fund, it went from 25,000 one year to 550,000 the
Correct.
next. Do you know what happened?
The land sale.
Oh, okay.
To development.
Good. That explains that. So that's where the dividend and interest is coming from? Because the general fund is pretty small.
Right. I mean, that land sale is what's making this all possible.
Okay. And I think that was. If the board should make a decision whether the major renovation, whether this is an application for major renovation or not. So let me read the definition. You have Lewis's report as to why he thinks it isn't, but our regs to 1.16. 1B1 says a major alteration means a project for which an environmental assessment form is prepared or required. An activity which can reasonably be expected to have a substantial and adverse impact on the adjacent community, lots or lots owners of the cemetery, including any of the following: demolition, stockpiling materials, grading and other forms of earthwork, dumping, filling, or depositing of any material, excavation or trenching, dredging, removal of soil, flooding or draining, or paving or construction of buildings, structures, or facilities. So that, as long as the board is comfortable that none of those activities are going on, then it should state that this is not a major renovation application and doesn't need board approval for that.
I'm assuming that the staff have seen the site, reviewed the work, and made a determination or recommendation, recommended as a non-major.
Correct.
Okay.
And the repairing roadways
Yeah.
does it.
That makes some sense to me.
I mean, that's really talking about taking a road down to its bed and redoing it and doing it on a significant scale. Filling in a pothole is not a major renovation.
Yeah,
There-
sometimes there's grading work or things that, altering the slope of the land.
Right.
Doesn't sound like.
Right. I mean, when I think of the grading they're talking about there, I think of somebody's terracing a hillside or something tantamount to that.
So this sounds like
This is
what you would
patchwork,
be doing
essentially.
in like deferred maintenance that needs to be done.
Exactly what it is.
So determination is non-major renovation. The application is before us. 20,000. No.
$150,000.
$150,000 in a PM loan, with including a $35,000 contingency, which they will, if they want to access, they'll seek division approval, review and approval, and subject to approval of council's review of the petition.
And said draft shall include, shall specify a start and end date for their repayments.
Okay. Any other changes to my motion? Seems sufficient. Have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Application approved. Bedford Union Cemetery, permanent maintenance loan.
This is actually, in some ways, very similar to Woodland, in that it's a logical follow-up to a previous board action. The board, 2 years ago, approved their purchase of an adjoining parcel of land. They had two options. One is they could do it with the PM loan, at which point they were going to have to come back to the board and get a further recommendation of approval and go to court, or they could use their general funds. The long backstory to this is they had a special fund that they believed was unrestricted. Upon audit, we concluded and they agreed was, in fact, should be treated as PM funds, which is why they didn't have tons and tons of cash. They decided to go ahead and make the acquisition with general funds. So they did that. They now don't have enough general funds to develop the new section because they spent it all on acquiring it in the first place. So they need approval to go ahead and do the work to develop the section. This one we have treated as a major renovation. We went through the major renovation we went through the major renovation factors, I should say. I think no, I take that back. We did treat it as a major renovation. My bad. I only wrote the thing. I don't know what I wrote. But it's not going to be extensive work. But right now, what's on the parcel is just someone's backyard essentially. It's a bunch of trees, and they're just going to have to clear it up and put in roads to be able to do it as a cemetery. Their plan is to do this in multiple phases. So
How big's the parcel?
2 acres. Not exactly 2 acres, but I think it's 2.1 acres. Very close to 2 acres. And it immediately adjoins the cemetery. They want to go ahead and develop it, and they need to borrow against their PM to do it. This, like Woodland, is a cemetery that's largely been inactive in terms of sales. In their case, not because it was poorly maintained, it's very well maintained, but because they've had nothing to sell. They, about 10 years ago, I think, got permission from the division to close roads and paths to turn them into graves to sell. Nobody wants those. They've sold 2. It's not because people don't want to be in the cemetery, it's people don't want to be squeezed in between rows. They want their things in a nice, orderly section. So they've spoken to funeral directors. They're pretty confident of the demand for this. We wouldn't have approved their purchase of the land. Were we also not confident of this? And they just need to go ahead and do it.
And what's the deal?
They want $150,000. That's going to cover the first phase of the project. As of right, they seem to think incorrectly that based on the numbers, their prices right now, that phase 1 will generate enough money to pay for phase 2 by itself. One thing that we're in continuing discussion with them, and this doesn't, I don't think, directly affect what you have to do, but it's important background, is they don't currently mark up their opening fee or their foundation fee. It's a straight pass-through from their contractor.
So glad you mentioned that. I saw that. That just jumped right out.
Look, it's because they've been so inactive for so long. It hasn't been on their radar. But we want them to charge something in addition to that, and not just have it be a straight pass-through. Their fees are not excessive. They could easily do that and still have quite a reasonable fee for that. And that will generate more money for them more quickly, which could very well pay for phase 2 by itself. If it doesn't, they can always come back to us.
They're looking for a $150,000
Yes.
loan against, what's the PM fund?
Right. Hang on.
1.387.
Okay.
Yeah, they
Get that
give their
public wheel.
yeah they're
So not a big chunk of their
I
PM
see
fund.
1.6.
They actually have effectively 2.8 million in PM because it's
Oh, that's right.
1.6 million.
Plus the special.
It's just over 1.6 million in the actual PM fund and 1.2 million in the Clark fund,
And
which
the
is
terms
effectively
are
PM.
what?
So that's not restricted.
That is, other than the restrictions on that, it was as best we can tell, and we've done an audit on them several times. The restrictions on that are that they can't that it's to be used to preserve and maintain the cemetery.
Okay.
In some, it
So
may not be
same
exactly what it says, but in
basically.
sum and substance, that's what it is. So it's essentially a donation to PM.
Got it.
They just keep it in a separate account. So
And the terms are?
repayment. Repayment.
It's another 10-year.
Yeah. Where's the repayment?
This one, there actually is a petition, I think.
Yep.
But again, there's no specific beginning date or end date.
No, because they deliberately left. See, the problem is their draft petition still talks about 250,000,
Yeah.
which was their original ask. They're going to have to conform that to their new ask. I had the repayment. Alicia, do you remember? I don't know why I can't find it right now. Because we just
Not in the initial report.
it should be. We discussed this. We discussed this at length. Well, they're projecting. Yeah. They're proposing to repay it over a 5-year period. Sorry, is buried. They're projecting to repay it over a 5-year period. Sorry, it's on page 3 of the accountant's report. 30,000, $30,000 a year over a 5-year period.
And straight,
Straight up, no interest,
no interest,
no chaser,
no balloon.
no balloon payment. It's a straight repayment.
Okay.
All right, so they will have to include specific start and end dates for
Yes.
the repayment.
And they'll have to make sure it says 150,000, not 250,000.
Right.
Their attorney is on their board. It shouldn't. He's been the one sort of taking the lead on the project. That should be not a problem. The other thing I should note on this is Woodland had, as best they could, estimates for the work they were going to do. A lot of people with Woodland wouldn't bid on the job until they knew they had the money. Bedford doesn't have hard estimates. Their president is in construction. None of this is going to be done through related parties, but he has general knowledge of what things cost and has created a cost budget based on that. And obviously, they can't exceed. Well, they can exceed that budget. They just can't exceed it out of PM funds.
Yeah.
But he's pretty confident of his numbers. But that's again, there are no bids, but that's what it's based on.
Well, keep in mind, this one actually is a major renovation
Correct.
application. In
Correct.
addition to, it seeks
Right, I laid out the
recommendation
factors
of-
on page 2 of my thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, normally when the board has a major renovation application in front of it, there are hard numbers. They might want to delegate to division the authority to review proposed contracts and work as it comes in to make sure that they are unrelated parties and there's nothing squirrely coming in.
Well, I suppose another way to address that would be to condition the approval on them not using related parties. They'd have to come back.
Could they just provide us copies of their contracts?
Of course.
And then
Of course.
affidavit that there's no related party transaction.
The latter is probably more important than the former, because I wonder who the hell that
No,
people
I
are.
understand, but typically, would we typically see specific estimates or contracts for the contractors? Is that something, no?
We don't always get it.
Okay.
We don't always get estimate. We don't, unlike the Vandalism Fund, where they're using our money, we don't actually require competing bids for major renovations. It obviously is nice to have hard bids as opposed to just a budget. But
We're really approving the financing.
and the major renovation factors, that it's not adverse effect on the community, yada, yada, yada. That said,
And
I
there's no,
agree that we should.
no question of a interest payment or anything like that.
They don't have any. This is already a pretty aggressive repayment schedule. I don't
I'm raising
particularly
it.
want to add to that.
Okay. All right, so we have the application of Bedford Union Cemetery in front of us, permanent maintenance loan in the amount of $150,000. A major renovation, 5-year repayment, $30,000 a year, no interest, subject to approval of council of their petition, which would include the issues of start dates and, pardon me, correcting the numbers. Are there any other caveats to our motion?
Yes, there is, because the major renovation piece, like any other major renovation piece, should be subject to their receipt of any applicable local permits.
Okay.
And the PM piece is only a recommendation. That's subject to recommendation to the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
And also statement regarding related party transactions.
Sure, that they will provide us with information sufficient for us to determine that they are either not engaging in related party transactions, or if they are, that they've complied with the law.
Right.
Right? And nobody here is speaking on that, right? There's no.
They're available if we need them, but I don't think they're going to have a problem with any of that.
Okay. So I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved the Bedford Union Cemetery. Chenango Valley Cemetery is on the list. It's not up for approval yet. My apologies. We have, Tony has worked with the attorneys at the cemeteries, received their answers to his questions. I don't know how, you can add more to this, Tony, but right now the review is continuing, going through approval processes. And again, my goal, I think I said this before, this is a interesting and important potential business model, modernization model. We want to make sure we get it right. And if it requires some other change in regs or statutes, that's important for us to know so that we can proceed forward there, because this is a cemetery, there's certain urgency in the cemetery's finances. And again, this model is one that we've actually already approved partially. This is bigger in scope and distance. So, Tony, you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I have gotten written responses from counsel for Buffalo City Cemetery, but we haven't had a chance to discuss the responses with counsel and with division. And yeah, there are the big policy and questions of law are still out there, how to deal with that. Because this is something that does not exist. And this would, if this one is approved, Buffalo City Cemetery has made it clear that they're going to go into other counties as well.
It's going to be more like Buffalo State Cemetery.
Yeah, right. So that's a significant policy change in the business model. It's a deviation from anything that exists currently. So there are significant policy issues there. But the process is ongoing.
Again, I'm cognizant of the urgency of the Chenango Valley Cemetery and their fiscal situation. So we're going to work as hard as we can to bring this to closure.
Yeah.
Any comments from the board?
What kind of time frame are we looking at to try to get this?
Question. One of the things we haven't made a decision on yet is there's a statutory interpretation involved. It deals with, it talks about where a cemetery files its certificate of incorporation. And it mentions that wherever there's a part of the cemetery, it has to file in the county where those parts are. So it implies that a cemetery can be in more than one county, but it also implies that what they contemplated was a cemetery, a single parcel of cemetery being in more than one county, rather than owning many parcels in many different counties. So the question is, are we going to counsel's office here, opine, or are we going to go to the Office of Attorney General, get opinions, ask them? And I've done some research. I don't want to get into where I think it's going, but it's a challenging interpretation. So, but like I said, that's probably going to take the longest. I think the more minutia can be, assuming we get past the policy and legal issues, the minutia of how do you deal with having meetings, lot owner meetings when you have lots in different counties, hundreds of miles away, access to records, ties to your local community that are part of the Article 15. Those things I think can be worked out. I don't think those. Yeah, I don't feel those things would stop this. The issues of law and policy are potential roadblocks.
So as it stands now, definition of cemetery being in more than one location is not a concern, because you have cemeteries that are, 3 separate non-contiguous parcels, let's say, but is the idea that now they are not in super remote locations, so it's a matter of degree, essentially, of what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, it's one thing when you have, we've talked about issues of abandonment. And it's one thing like we had in Whispering Maples where the towns are right next to each other
Right.
and they know each other and can work things out when their pieces are being abandoned to them, pieces of land and pieces of money. It's a whole nother thing when you've got communities in far-flung counties.
And
how-
more and more communities
Right.
as it gets bigger and bigger.
Right. And having one abandonment affect multiple communities in multiple counties, that's a policy issue. And frankly, it's a question for all your principals to address. Do we want to be the ones deciding that this is appropriate, or would it be more appropriate to let the legislature decide that this is something that could be permitted under Article 15? Would that be the proper place to have this
Right.
debated?
We do have one cemetery, precisely one cemetery that crosses county lines with non-contiguous property. They're adjoining counties, but Rockville Cemetery and Rockville Center land does not in any way, shape, or form border Springfield Cemetery in Queens, and they are in fact one entity.
Well, Forest Lawn's merged with other.
Right, those are within a county, but
Within a county,
across
but
town lines.
across
Yes,
town.
that we have several of.
But, I mean, on the Rockville Center, when that was approved, I was here when that was approved. No one really thought about the possibility of what's being proposed now. And
It's obviously
whether Rockville
different.
Center was rightly or wrongly decided, the state is not obligated to continue making a mistake it made once. In fact, the law specifically says you can't hold a state to continue making a mistake. The legal concept of res judicata doesn't apply to the state. It gets to fix its mistakes.
Well, I don't know about legally, but practically speaking, being in Rockville Center versus being just over the Queens-Nassau line
Is very
a
different.
little different. More than a little
Yeah.
different.
Well, I don't know, I mean, again, would you like to
Absolutely.
represent the,
David Fleming, and I'm representing Buffalo City Cemetery. We've addressed a couple of these issues on other occasions. While there are not regulated cemeteries that are currently doing this, there are unregulated cemeteries, including several dioceses across the state of New York who operate cemeteries in far-flung areas. We are not talking about creating an island of a cemetery somewhere. We've been very specific to the board about creating clusters of cemeteries. We believe, based on two able councils, that there is no prohibition in statute that prohibits these cemeteries from operating. Additionally, regulated cemeteries are currently operated in cluster models informally through management contracts with other operations like grave diggers and that sort of thing. Talking about cemeteries that are in deep fiscal stress. This particular application was submitted in October of last year. If the argument by the board is going to be that there has to be a legislative change, I think it behooves the board to immediately notify cemeteries involved. The legislature is already in April of the year. They leave in June. And it's frankly a little frustrating that this has been out there for so long, and now there's a discussion that there has to be potentially a legislative fix. That's extremely unfortunate. I think it's completely unnecessary. This is one of the nation's leading cemeteries. It's very sound fiscally, has a proven track record in the mergers that this board has already approved, and what they're proposing is the same sort of mechanism that they have already instituted, which has been approved and is shown to be successful, but also that's already being operated by cemeteries across the state of New York. These are cemeteries that are in difficult financial stress. I would also point out that the cemetery was not sought out by Forest Lawn. This was a cemetery that came to Forest Lawn and asked for a discussion about the potential merger. I think Mr. Malone is absolutely correct. I think a lot of the issues related to community focus have been answered by the cemetery. I think Buffalo City Cemeteries have a track record of building community engagement, getting groups of people that are not previously engaged in the cemeteries, getting them engaged. So absent any formal discussion, if the board is coming down that there has to be some sort of legislative fix, or a 5-month review by the Office of the Attorney General, no disrespect, but I know that there are many requests that go in. I ask that that be passed along as quickly as possible. I think it's only fair to the people involved that they address. And I would also point out Article 15, 1501 has a specific requirement on the State Cemetery Board and their efforts to prevent the abandonment of cemeteries, and that's what we're talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the board is contemplating anything at the point. We haven't gotten the issues before us, but
I get
but
that,
I
but
get.
out of due respect.
I agree with you.
for the
100.
clients
I agree with you 100%.
their
And
efforts.
my goal would be to. That's why it stayed on the agenda this month, and I think it's very important that we're open and transparent as possible about our deliberations. So I agree with you.
Thank you.
And we have all the information that we need at this point.
Yeah, we just have to get through our legal review and then have that presented to the board.
And in that regard, if you need anything, they're more than happy to provide any information.
Okay. Any other questions about the Shenango Valley merger request? Marcellus Cemetery in Onondaga County, a columbarium. It's to build a columbarium.
Mike, I'm going to defer to you on this. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've done too much talking already.
Marcellus is a small rural cemetery. They want to put a 32-inch columbarium up. They told the funeral directors and there's a need in the area. They're actually, interestingly, they're purchasing the columbarium directly from the distributor, I guess, and having it shipped there. They're saving an awful lot of money. And they're doing all the prep work themselves, the pad and the actually setting it. They're acting as the general contractor for that, so they're keeping their costs down. The only interesting thing is in their resolution, they approved to not spend more than $10,000 on this project. And in the final application, it came out as $10,019. And I questioned them on that. And they said that the $4,500 for site prep was an estimate based on the fact that it's going to be done through volunteers and paying for fuel and materials and things like that. And they figured that $19 would even out. It's probably going to be under the 10,000. They just wanted to be clear on putting that number there.
We'll pass that.
Chris
Yeah, I'll
Costco-
gladly donate $19.
Chris Costco looked at it. He sees a 51% annual return on a 4-year sellout. They think they can do it. He's recommended approval and division recommended.
Any questions? The general fund, right?
I had some. The map or sketch indication of the location of the building. I'm not clear from looking at it. It looks like a tax map. It looks like some areas have been blocked in black. Can you be more specific about where on the property this columbarium is going to be?
It's at the X. The cemetery acquired a new
Okay.
parcel of land on the south side. It basically is this rectangle. And so that's all undeveloped at this point. They have an existing road through there. And that's where
Yeah, what happens when we scanned it, the X got blacked out.
Right, so just those 4 black marks.
it was highlighted.
So the entire box labeled Sealy, that's no
Yes.
cemetery property?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that blob in the Sealy property is where it's going.
I would also suggest in the future that if you can get a Google Maps, because it's important, I think, for the board to see where it is in relation to existing lots.
That's a
And
good
this
point.
doesn't show you that, this tax map.
I believe I had one, but I just didn't think it would. So you can see that X, all the woodland around there.
Okay, great.
How long ago did they acquire that plot?
Maybe 5 years ago.
And then,
Was it donated or did they purchase it? Or?
It was purchased. Actually, Celia is a board member. And it was disclosed, but they
Saw that.
bought it before it could be development. They didn't want it to be sold for development, and I think the rest, or a big portion of the Sealy property was, and they reserved that for the cemetery.
Okay, so they kept part of that. So the cemetery is kind of a Z shape though.
Yes.
Okay.
And I was in there looking at that in the early part of the winter, and I got stuck, and had to have the town of Marcellus come and sand the road.
So the other concern I had was about the sign. And so first, did they comply with where the signs had to be located at all entrances and where the mausoleum was going to be constructed?
Yes,
And
they
at the
had,
office.
the sign was located, there's two entrances, but the one was blocked.
So that does not
So that was
count.
basically at the main entrance.
And was it posted at the office and at the construction site?
There's no office, and it was posted as close to the construction site as they could be at the time.
Okay. I'd like to work with Division on coming up with a template for what these signs should look like, so that each cemetery isn't coming up with its own version of a sign.
Right.
It's supposed to give notice to lot owners. It just says comments until, maybe a little more language there saying you have the right to comment, or please submit comments, or a little more clarity, so that people know why these signs are there and that they have the right to.
Most cemeteries use the sign as a kind of an advance advertisement, coming soon type thing, and then they include our language in that. But I think it probably would be good if we had a template for them,
Yeah, this way we're not getting.
similar to like the way your template for the legal notice for the hazardous monuments.
Makes sense.
I think that was. I had a question about.
Minutes should reflect that.
I took a note.
Okay. There's a financial question too. Let's see if I can find that in here.
I want to get Joe on the phone for that. I
We'll
don't
see
know
if
I
we
can
need them.
answer it.
We'll see if we need them.
Let's see if we need them.
They have lots of money for a small cemetery.
I do.
Oh yeah, it was an income. The line for foundations. The number of burials stayed the same, 2016, 2017, from 19 to 20, but the foundation income dropped from 1,600 to 600.
Double graves, lines of foundation.
I mean, it's possible. I don't know the answer to that. It's possible.
Joe's not going to know the answer to that either.
It's a significant drop because all the previous years you went from 2,200, 1,900, 1,600, then all of a sudden 600.
I mean, if the two most logical explanations for that would be that either these are second interments in double depth graves, or in side by side graves where the foundation was poured in advance, or where you had, or if they actually have lines of foundation poured. Do they pour
They don't do
lines?
lines of
so,
foundation.
So, if it's not double graves, then I have no. We don't know.
Could be a
Short
timing
answer is we
thing
don't know.
too. Maybe they got a different contractor, they got behind and doing their foundations.
Or they got ahead
Is
of
it-
doing their foundations.
How material is it in the overall financials?
Not in the slightest. I mean, they.
Yeah, it's just an anomaly, and when I see the anomalies, I make sure I alert the board.
They in the same year where their foundation income dropped so precipitously, they made $8,000, whereas in previous years they made $2,000, lost a couple hundred, and made $100. So it's in their best financial year in the last 4.
Okay. Noted, and we'll try to find that out, and you can bring that back to us. But I don't know if that gets in the way of the approval of the project. I have a motion to approve the Marcellus Cemetery
Columbarium.
columbarium development. And I don't know if anything's noted there. I think we'll follow up on the financial questions,
Maybe, we could just,
get an update from the,
Report it
not to hold up the approval, but
Right.
just get that information.
any other
that we have.
questions or caveats to the motion?
No.
Second? Second, all in favor? Application approved. We have people here.
Oh, I apologize. There was something that I forgot to add to the division report.
Uh-huh.
We have been sued Surprise, surprise. We have been sued by Beverly Hills Cemetery, also known as Rose Hills Memorial Park, over our denial of their application to buy a whole bunch of land from two of their board members and a company made up of two of their board members and a bunch of their relatives.
Oh, it should be
Yeah.
said former. Are they still?
Yeah,
on board?
One, no, they are both still on the board.
Okay.
And so
Well,
we have
it's
been
a-
sued.
It's a
We've been
public
sued.
record.
We have turned it over to the Attorney General to defend us. And it's returnable in early May. I confidently expect that date will get adjourned.
That is highly likely.
The lawsuit's here in Albany County, and that's what we got.
It's an Article 78 proceeding, so
Right.
the issue is where we are. Was the board
Arbitrary
arbitrary?
Thank you. Is there people who are wishing to speak to the board on a topic? State your name and where you're from.
My name is Nayyar Imam, and I'm president of Long Island Muslim Alliance. When we walked in the room, we have a few questions, but after listening to all of you, it looks like it's very complicated to have a cemetery. We are in the process of buying a cemetery from a church in Long Island in Carrollton. It's a land which was approved for cemetery, and they never used it. And they want to sell it because there is a need of Muslim community. There is no cemetery, Muslim cemetery in New York State. So what I will suggest that the gentleman said that there is a cemetery 101 presentation. If you can give it to us in Long Island, and if you want to come us here, we want to learn about it because it's very extensive and complicated issue. We should not have a series of questions which we cannot ask you right now. So I will suggest that if you can arrange some kind of presentation for the cemetery for our community, I will really appreciate that.
Sure. I mean, the short answer is sure, of course. The longer answer is that we. Tony, do you want to do this? Why
Well,
don't you
the
do this?
first
It's a law
question
thing.
is whether it's even within our jurisdiction.
Right.
You said it's a church cemetery that you're buying?
Yeah, we are the mosque and we are buying from the church.
Okay. And do you have an actual religious organization that's been
Yes, sir,
established?
we do.
And so you would be running the cemetery as a religious?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We don't get involved in that. We get involved in public cemeteries and religious cemeteries that are run by a religious organization, and you have to be formed as a religious organization, aren't under this board's jurisdiction. The Office of Attorney General deals with
Right.
charities generally. I don't know if there's someone there who might get involved.
Yes, and we can give you some guidance because you would be subject, even though you wouldn't be regulated by the cemeteries division, the not-for-profit corporation law would still apply to you. I have
The rest of it, not
the
our
rest of it.
piece.
The rest, there's a lot of not-for-profit corporation law that doesn't have to do with cemeteries, but you're not-for-profit entity, a religious corporation.
Yes.
I have a question. The cemetery that you're buying, or potentially buying the cemetery from, are they a religious corporation or are they a not-for-profit corporation that would be regulated by us?
They are religious, non-for-profit.
They are also.
They are regulated by Attorney General.
Well, it depends on which denomination as to whether they have to go through you.
Yeah. They've had
They are
that.
Catholics.
Oh, then they don't.
Okay.
You know what? I will give you my card. I won't be the one to give you the instruction, but give me a call and I can put you in touch with someone from our charities division to answer some basic questions.
And once you're done with them, so our law does not apply to religious cemeteries, but the Catholic cemeteries in particular generally follow our law as guidance because the religious corporation law doesn't give that much guidance as to what to do. So if you have technical questions about how to get things going, we're happy to talk to you about those things with the proviso that none of what we say, strictly speaking, applies to you. But we do answer, with that bunch of throat clearing, we do answer religious cemeteries operational questions all the time. So
why don't I get your card also when you're done with the Attorney General's office?
Sure.
Get in touch with you, and
Sure.
if you have time, you can come to us or we
Absolutely.
can come to you. And whatever question you have, we can ask them.
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And you asked, is the Cemetery 101 presentation a a PowerPoint or a,
We have some PowerPoints.
so we,
Slides.
when you, after we touch, we may be able to provide you with some technical
Thank you very much.
assistance. So
Thanks.
I'm sorry that we made you wait through all of that.
There's also somebody, there's probably somebody at the diocese whose contact I can give you because they are probably the most sophisticated people in terms of running religious cemeteries. So I've done this with at least one other Muslim group. I'm happy to give you their contact.
Thank you very much.
So after the meeting, we'll exchange cards, and thank you for your patience. Are there anybody else wish to speak to the board?
Sure.
Sure.
David Coleman from the New York State Association of Cemeteries. Just two quick things. One on the signage guidelines that you just talked about. We'd ask that it be about content and not necessarily about presentation. We have some very sophisticated cemeteries who have a very specific style in which they like to handle their expansions and their notices to the public. So the information content I think is fine, but if they want to do a little artwork and they want to do a little something extra,
Sure.
I don't think the cemetery
And
commission
actually-
board would want to get in the way of doing that.
If you want to send us samples of what you think are good signs that your membership have used.
Sure. I have a couple in mind of applications.
Yeah, that'd be
recently, 'cause some of these cemeteries, in all seriousness, like to provide renderings and so forth to their membership. And not everyone can afford to do that, but there are cemeteries that don't want to be limited.
I'd actually take that one step further. I think from a policy perspective, we actually like that because if they use the sign to market it and they get inquiries saying, I'm interested, then when we put the application to the board, we can say, hey, listen, they've got X number of people who are already interested. We have a certain greater degree of confidence that the project is going to be successful.
No, that's true. And the only other issue is just going back to the beginning on the vandalism piece. NISAC specifically continues to advocate for additional revenue streams for the abandonment fund.
Thank you.
I think that it's extremely sad that we're in. I'm still tired from the end of the budget negotiations, but we've just completed them, and we are already saying that we only have $300,000 available for this current fiscal year. And I point that out since potentially that since the press just wrote an article about your last cemetery board meeting, I'd like to make that very clear. That's extremely unfortunate. The association has advocated the increase that we have now, which is great and appreciated, but it is not enough. And the increased number of abandonments, and potentially even more after this meeting, that is a real issue that we think needs to be addressed. And I realized by comments made in other meetings where we've passed the sweeps potentially of how much money has been taken away by the state from these funds. That doesn't negate the fact that the money is absolutely needed. And these municipalities should not have to cut back on what they're going to do to maintain the cemeteries because the state doesn't have enough money to do that. They have a responsibility under state law to take over the cemeteries. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the public before the board? Our next meeting, which I've always forgotten to say, somebody had to remind me,
May
but Paul's
6th.
not here, so.
Monday. It is a Monday, May 6th at 10 a.m., not 10:30. And not here, not even in the city of Albany. It is at the Desmond in Colony. It is? Yeah. Oh, really? I did not know that. I thought it was Colony. All right, well, it's at the Desmond, wherever the Desmond may be. I don't know which county it's in, but it's in the, just joking. It's at the Desmond. It'll be part of NISAC's annual policy. This is the policy conference, correct? And
So we have a board meeting, just if people know, we have a board meeting.
with a big audience.
With a big audience. And we'll just do that in public, and then there's, I don't know if there's questions or,
There'll be room for executive session as well.
yeah. Okay. So, is there need to go into executive session?
There is one matter for which we need to go into executive session. Just to get, for you to give the same update you gave me.
Okay,
Okay.
apparently there is.
Any other, we're going to go in for an update on a pending legal matter?
Pending investigation.
Pending investigations. I have a motion to go into executive session if we take action, we will come out and report
We won't.
was action. Unlikely, but we'll just, so I have a motion to adjourn this meeting and go into executive session for the purposes of getting an update on pending investigation.
Second?
All in favor?